Okay, today we are going to focus on a couple of different techniques in, I think, a cute little card. It's a square card. And I wanted to share with you the inspiration for what I did. And yes, you are staring at a plastic container of leaves. Yesterday, when I went out and got the mail, I looked around our yard because I hadn't really put together the example. I needed some inspiration. And I found it. And I found some really cool designs and colors and shapes. And I brought these back in, as you can see, into the craft room. I will tell you that a bug did crawl out from one of them. That was not very pleasant, but he did not last long. And I took these leaves out, and then I got some of my inks out that I thought sort of matched some of the colors. And they became some inspiration for what I'm going to show you. So let me show you an example of what I did. And let me first introduce you to the pretty much the stamp set that I used to create the card. I have a lot of stamp sets that have leaves in them. And honest to goodness, I almost didn't buy this one because I thought, why do I need another one? And I'm glad I did get this one and the corresponding dies. There's some really cool dies. This is not the complete set. I've taken the ones out that cut out the shapes of the leaves, but there's some really nice dies in here. But the stamp set is what I've fallen in love with because you know me and you know that I like grunge, and there are some cool grunge stamps in here that allowed me to, I'm not going to say recreate because Mother Nature does it a heck of a lot better than I would ever be able to do, but allowed me to kind of recreate some of the grungy backgrounds in these leaves where they've got the spots, but you can still see the veins. And anyway, I thought that it would be cool to try and use these stamps to mimic a little bit what I found out in our yard. And this is what I came up with. So this is a card, and I'm purposely angling it down because one of the things I'm going to show you is this really fun way to do some scoring in your scoring board. And you can kind of see it a little better when I don't shine it directly in the light. But the leaves are really kind of fun. They have a lot of different coloring in them, a lot of different layers. And I'm going to show you quickly how to do that, and also how to do some fun little scoring so that you can put some custom score lines on your card and just make it a little bit interesting. This is the square one. And I also have one that is a full-size card. And you can see that they are the exact same design, done just a little differently because you can't recreate the same colors. And obviously the one that's the regular A2 card has more white space at the top, but I definitely think it's just a fun little technique. So I'm going to literally jump in. I'm going to grab my Stamparatus. I really highly recommend that you do have a Stamparatus for this because you're going to be stamping a lot of the same image multiple times. And I have the grungy stamps on a couple of blocks. That was just an easy way to get them in a place where I would be able to use them quite a bit. And I'm just going to kind of start here. I'm not going to bore you guys to tears by going through and doing die cutting. I've done a lot of die cutting before getting on the call, but I did want to show you a little bit about how I made the different layers for these leaves. And once you see how one is done, you're going to see the pattern. So let's look at this leaf. I'm going to start with the longer leaf. And if I hold that up, you can see that there are 3 colors that are involved. And I used Mango Melody, Granny Apple Green, and Early Espresso on that particular leaf. And the way that I did the stamping is I'm going to start this leaf with the Mango Melody, and I'm just stamping the entire image because I want that to be my base color. I've positioned my stamps in here so that I can get a kind of 2 for 1. So I've got that base color down. And then what I'm going to do is I am going to use these 2 stamps. These are the Grunge stamps that we saw that come in the set. And one is a really cool multi-layer looking series of dots and splotches and all of that. And then the other one is a group of smaller dots. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use the smaller dot, and we're going to do kind of a kissing technique. So I'm grabbing my Granny Apple Green, and I am going to ink up this stamp. And this is just a really fun stamp. But what I'm not going to do is I am not going to stamp onto this image. And part of the reason why I'm not going to do that is I want to maintain where the yellow vein or the white veins are. I want you to be able to see those white veins. And if I just randomly stamp over my leaf image, I am very likely to get some of those dots right over where the white veining is showing. So what I'm going to do instead is I am going to stamp onto my stamp. So I'm going to take my stamped image and I'm going to come right back over, and I just stamped onto the stamp that I have already used, and I'm going to bring that over. And what happens is I get the stamp on the areas, or the ink on the areas where I want it to be. I don't get the ink on the white veins because that's not how the stamp is designed. And I get a really cool image. Then I'm going to take some Early Espresso. I am going to just sort of dab that around the edges. And that is going to allow me to put a little bit of brown right around the edge of this particular leaf. And now I have 3 colors that are showing on that piece. So it's just a really fun way to add those 3 colors and get that leaf to have a lot of personality. On the next one, and I'm just going to flip this over, I am going to focus on this little leaf. And I'm going to use just a little bit of a different combination on this one. I am going to have a different base color, and it is going to be cinnamon cider. This is one of my absolute all-time favorite. I'm lying to you. I'm using pumpkin pie first. I'm going to come back with the cinnamon cider. So I'm going to use pumpkin pie, which is also one of my favorite colors for fall. It's just a really, really pretty, deep, rich orange color. And it's very, very bright, very festive. I turned that over because I still have ink on my other leaf, and I just didn't want to get that in a place where I don't want it. So I'm starting with the pumpkin pie for this one. And then I'm going to come back in with some cinnamon cider. And on the first leaf that I didn't use this grunge stamp. I am going to use it on the leaf that I'm doing now. This is going to give us a little bit more spotty areas and a couple of different layers of the ink color because it's one of the distinctive stamps. So you're going to get multiple layers in there. So just like I did the first one, I'm going to ink up my big grunge stamp with the cinnamon cider, and I'm just going right over the stamp that I just inked up, and I stamped right on top of that, and I'm going to come back over, and I've got just some really, really cool, and you'll see this in a minute, really cool areas where you can still see the orange, but those browns are blending in and they just add so much character. And then I am going to wipe this off a little bit because I'm going to use a lighter color. I'm coming back in with that green. So I am just taking some ink off. I've got a scrap piece of paper going back in. If I had put yellow on here and I was coming in with a darker color, I'm not going to get super crazy about having to take the ink off my stamp before I go back and kiss the other stamp, because the darker ink is not likely going to get polluted by the lighter ink. So if you go light, dark, you should be okay without having to really clean it too much. And then I came back in with the Granny Apple Green. So I started with pumpkin pie, then cinnamon cider, and then I added the Granny Apple Green. And it's just gorgeous. There are so many layers of color that you can see in that. And there's just a lot of different fun pieces, fun elements to that. And then the last one that I'm going to do, and I'm going to do this one pretty quickly, is the focal point. So the focal point I chose was the maple leaf. And I liked it because it's the largest stamp of the leaves that are included in the set. And there's just a lot of area where you can have some fun with the different colors that you might choose. So it's the exact same process. On this one, I'm actually going to start with a really light color. And the color that I'm choosing to start this one with is Grapefruit Grove. And the reason is, if you look at the card, the piece that I put in the back, and I'll give the dimensions for that in a minute when we start putting the colors together, the frame that I have is Grapefruit Grove. So I wanted to sort of pull that in a little bit. And I start the base of this one with the Grapefruit Grove color, which when you see it and you think about a false leaf and the colors that you normally consider fall-ish, not so sure that that starts off as super, super fall-ish, but it will end up as definitely a fall color. And then I'm going to come back in. I'm going to use my big grunge stamp one more time. And this time I'm going to put some cinnamon cider, which was the same color that I used on the other leaf. So I don't need to worry about cleaning off my stamp before coming in on this particular leaf. And again, that has just added an amazing, I don't know if this really shows well on camera, but here it adds so much dimension to this image. It really, really makes it pop. And then on this one, to finish it off with some, just a little bit more for the small dots. I'm just going to clean this off. I am going to bring back a cherry cobbler ink spot, and I'm going to put a little bit of cherry cobbler onto the stamp that has the small dots. And I am going to clean off, although this isn't the best cleaning method, but it's going to work well enough right now. Get that cinnamon cider ink off. I'm going to come back in and ink, stamp up my leaf, and then I have just a gorgeous, 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 gorgeous leaf that has a ton of different colors in it. And it is just stunning. So that is a way, I think a really fun way, and you saw it was really pretty quick, to take these images that are in this set and create some leaves that, let's be honest, do not do justice to what Mother Nature did when she was working in our yard. And I am not trying to compete with her. Don't think that is possible. But if I bring these back and just show you some of the really amazing colors, we can see how these have worked together. And then I think, well, that one doesn't work so well. There was one that had some really cool greens, which have changed a little bit from yesterday. I think they've dried a little bit more than they had yesterday. But we can kind of see that there's some colors that are brought out in the real leaves. And this one in particular, I think, looks a lot like the one that I stamped with the different just little spots and blotches of color. So after I stamped up my leaves and I was happy with the way that the coloring ended up, I did something that is super, super straightforward. I used the dies that come with the set. These are the dies that are called intricate leaves dies, excuse me, and they are part of the bundle. So obviously I took each one of those and I cut out my leaves, and through the magic of preparing beforehand, these are the 3 leaves that I ended up with that are die cut, and I use the exact same process that I just showed you. So these are going to be the leaves that I will use when I recreate this card. So now that we've sort of created some of the focal points, let's talk a little bit about what pieces of paper you might need to put this card together. This card measures 4 1/4 squared. So it is half the size. When we look at the base, it is 8 1/2 long and 4 1/4 wide. And I am going to just recreate that base by taking a sheet of regular cardstock. I'm going to bring in my cutter. And I have a piece of, for these card bases, I like to use thick cardstock. It just gives a little bit more depth and strength to these cards. They're not large, so I like to give them just a little bit more sturdiness. So let's just for a second talk about how to cut this paper. We know that this is 8 1/2 inches long and this is 11 inches long. Well, my base needs to be 8 1/2 inches long. So if I put my paper into the paper cutter where the 11-inch side is horizontal, and I line up my paper at the 4 1/4 inch mark, and if I cut this, what I'm going to end up with is a piece that is 8 1/2 inches long and 4 1/4 inches wide. That's what I want. So I'm going to go ahead and just cut this right in half. And I'm going to get a piece that is going to be my base. It is 8 1/2 inches long, it's 4 1/4 inches wide. So if I then take my scoring board and I score this in half, I'm going to have the base for my card. I'm putting it in on the 8.5 inch side. It's 4¼ inches wide. I'm scoring it at 4¼ and this is going to be the base for my card. And I'm going to go ahead and just get that burnished and ready to go. What's nice about this is when this eventually goes into the A2 envelope, it's the same width as an A2 card. This is an A2 card, 4¼ by 5.5. So obviously it's the same width. It's not as long, again, obviously. So that's one piece. Then what I like to do, as you know, is I like to have kind of frames for my cards. So the next piece, which I used a piece of Grapefruit Grove, I wanted to cut so there was just a little bit of a border around all 4 sides of the card. So I can see that Grapefruit Grove, but not a lot. It's just a hint. I just wanted a little bit of color. I really want this to be a clean and simple card where most of the color is white. So this is cut to 4 1/8 inch square. And that will allow you to have a 1/16 inch on each side that's just going to be peeking out. So you're going to get that 1/16 inch border of the white in the back. And then the last piece that I cut was for my focal point. And again, I just wanted to continue to build that frame. And this is a piece that is 4 inches square. So again, starting with 8.5 by 4¼ score on the 8.5 inch side at 4¼ and you're going to get a 4¼ square base for your card. The next layer, if you want a frame, is 4 1/8 inch square, and that will leave you just a little bit of a border all the way around. And then the focal point is going to be 4 inches square, and that is also going to leave you a 1/16 inch just all the way around and give you that concentric kind of feel. So in order to mimic this card, what I would do next is actually figure out where I want my die cut to be. So the next 2 things that I'm going to do, I'm going to die cut where I want my focal point piece to be, and I'm going to score. And the order you want to do this in, you want to die cut first. Just remember, die cut first. If you do it in the opposite direction and you score and then you die cut, if you've scored and then you push everything through your die cutting machine, there is a high probability that you're going to flatten some of the scoring that you've already done. So die cut first. So what I would suggest is take the piece of paper that you are going to use as your focal point and figure out where you might want that die cut to be. And again, I wanted the shape to be that maple leaf. And I positioned it about here and I ran that through my die cutting machine and instant presto, there we go. So that is the piece that I am going to use on the front of the card. And I'm going to show you in a couple of minutes an example where you don't need to do a die cut and you will have a beautiful, beautiful card. But I just wanted to show you first how I did this card. So I said we were going to do 2 things. The first thing, die cut the front, and then we're going to do the scoring. So let's talk about the scoring. And I'm going to bring out my scoring board. I'm going to place this piece into my scoring board, and I'm just going to kind of think about where I want the score lines to go, like how far over in my leaf do I want there to be score lines? And I don't want it, me personally, I don't want it going all the way over to the edge of the leaf. I kind of want it sort of in the middle-ish so that it really highlights where that leaf is. And you'll see if I bring back in the one that is an A2 card, I purposely did these in 2 different widths. The one that I did in the square card has more score lines. The one that I did as an A2 card has fewer score lines. Personally, I prefer the fewer score lines. That's me. So on this card, I'm going to recreate these and just not do as many, but I'll show you how I did these. So I'm going to sort of think about maybe starting the score lines about here and going over somewhere around here, something like that. And I'm going to pick an area. So maybe I'll start in right here. And I'm going to go up to the top of my scoring board and just start scoring straight down. So I'm just going to score straight down like you normally do. Then I'm going to make sure that I follow that empty area and continue down. And that way, visually, I'm going to be scoring the same line all the way down. So I'm not hopping over to another line and making sure that it is even. I'm going to skip the next line and I'm going to go to the second one. So I'm going to score, skip, and then I'm going to score. And I'm going to do the exact same thing. Score up at the top, skip where it's empty, and just continue down at the bottom. And I'm going to skip the next one and I will score. I'm going to probably do this 4 times. And it's personal preference. You will find what you like. Skip that one, continue down at the bottom. And then, yeah, I think I'll do one more. So I'm going to skip the next and I will score here. So what I have done is scored 4 vertical places and I've skipped in between each of those. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this piece over and I'm just going to line it up so that I can see where I scored on the other side. And I'm lining that up so that I can see where that little area would be, where I would bring my tool down to make a score line. And I purposely skipped because on this side of the paper, I'm going to score in between where I scored on the other side. So I'm going to score here, skip, and then score at the bottom. And what this does is it creates a nice little design that breaks up the score lines because it's going to emboss and then de-emboss and emboss and de-emboss. And it just gives you a nice little pattern that looks like you had to have had a scoring tool or an embossing folder to make that design. So it's just a really fun little design that you can add, and it just gives a little personality to the card. And once I'm done with that, I'm going to show you, I'm going to talk through how I completed the card. But I'm not going to walk through all the steps because I think it is going to be very obvious in just a minute. Okay, one thing you can do with this piece, if you choose to put a frame behind, is you can cheat and you can stamp your sentiment and you can use a die. This came from the Tasteful Labels dies. I really like this die. And this, this stamp came from the Love of Leaves. This is one of the other stamp sets that I have that has a ton of leaves. This is one that we used a lot last year. I like this script, the thank you. It's just so subtle. And in my opinion, a design like this where you're really trying to get a very elegant focal point, a script like that just works really, really well. So what you can do if you want to conserve on paper is you can stamp your sentiment on your frame. You can die cut from your frame and leave a hole here that no one will know about. Just make sure that when you do that, that you're very intentional about where you're stamping on your frame so that that hole won't be seen through this piece of paper, through the front part. I took the easy way out. I had scrap and I actually die cut my sentiment from another piece. So very quickly, because I want to make sure I have a couple minutes to show you some alternatives on the scoring so that you can think about even more ways to use your scoring board. And also, I want to show you a way to make this card without die cutting the leaf shape out of the front. The first thing that I would do to put this card together is attach the frame to the card base. And I am purposely using Twine Bow on this so that I have an opportunity to get this as square as I can. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my focal point. I'm not attaching this yet because what I want to do first is I want to see where this would be centered on this card. And I'm going to take some washi tape and I'm just going to make sure that that focal point is secure enough for me to glue down my leaf, because I want to have my front piece, the white scored piece, that's raised on dimensionals. And in order for me to get that aligned with the leaf that I'm going to put in the background, I'm going to put this leaf in first. So I'm just going to have that together enough so that I can attach my leaf. I don't need a lot of glue to do this at all. I'm making sure that I'm putting some on the stem. Make sure that you do that since the stem is a different part of your die cut. And then it's a puzzle. It seriously is just a puzzle because all you're doing is fitting it into the same size hole that you already have in that front piece. And then you can take your focal point off the front and just be mindful and careful when you do that. Make sure that the piece that you just attached is staying put where you want it to. And then what you can do is use some dimensionals and attach that front piece right over where you laid your leaf. And when you do that, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to use quite a few dimensionals because you do not want that area to sag. You don't want to have any places where that leaf, the place where the leaf is cut out, is going to have an opportunity to sag. And some of you are probably going to gasp out loud by the number of dimensionals that I use. Please be patient. It's okay. I usually conserve on these, but in a case like this, I'm going to intentionally use a lot of these. I could cut these in half, and I probably would if I wasn't doing this a little quickly. But that might look like overkill, but what it's going to do is, especially here and here, it is going to support that piece. And what I like to do before I put anything on the front of a card, after I've put a lot of dimensionals, just put it down and very lightly tap on it. And that way you're going to see if there's some place that is not supported that might collapse after you put it on. And you may want to go back and put half a dimensional, or, consider putting a full dimensional on, and that way you're going to be assured that the piece is not going to collapse. It's just important to make sure that it really does stay sturdy. And then what I do, because I lose track of which ones I've taken off, I just go back and really fast make sure that the adhesive is exposed on each one. And then I'm going to come over the top because I can't see what I'm doing if I'm sitting down. Theoretically, because I lined everything up before I put it down, I should be able to look at the frame. So I'm looking at that Grapefruit Grove piece. And because I did center that when I put the top over, I got it nice and in place. And it's just a really fun focal point. That scoring, even though it's subtle, adds an awful lot to the card. I am not going to take the time to finish off putting this together because it's very self-explanatory. But let me show you the piece parts that I used, and then you can decide how you want to finish your card. What I did, as you can see from this example, is I bent these pieces just a little bit, and these are the leaves. I thought it gave a little bit more of a realistic impression if they were curled just a tad with a bone folder. And when you do leaves, remember that a leaf curls in many different directions. There's really no rhyme or reason exactly how it curls, especially when they're dried and they're on your lawn. So take some liberties, maybe fold them in different ways, and you can even figure out how they might best connect together and use your bone folder to get those leaves shaped in the way that you want. So I simply took my banner that I cut out, and I took the leaves that I also cut out, and I just placed them where I wanted them to be. And my preference on this is to kind of hide the other side of the tail on the banner. I just wanted one of the tails to show. And then I took a piece of the early espresso cardstock, and I mimicked the score lines that I had used on the white paper. I mimicked those score lines, and I just cut a little piece out and tucked that behind the sentiment and put those all down on the front of the card. And I also added some gems, and I thought it was really fun. I used a couple of different embellishments. One was the brushed metal, and then I also used the basic jewels, the rhinestones. And I thought it was really fun to tuck a couple up underneath where that leaf sort of goes in. And there's some other ones that are tucked away. And then the last thing that I did was a little bit of a twine bow. I don't know if you guys know this, but the Shimmering Crystal Effects, which is in the annual catalog, is a great glue as well as a great little embellishment. And I actually use this as my glue. It's very similar to Nuvo glue, and it works really, really well. So just a little tidbit there. And as you can see, that's how I finished this card. On the one that I did that was the A2, I don't know why. I thought it needed a little more elegant bling bling. So I actually tied a single bow, but when I tied the single bow, I used two colors of twine, a gold and a silver, and I just combined those. These are from the Elegant Trim. And then everything else I did in a similar way where I have the hidden gems. So that's some of the little tricks that I wanted to show you, but I also wanted to show you a couple other ways that you can make the focal point, and also that you can do the score lines. So let me show you. This is a sympathy card that I made recently. And the score lines on this one are not vertical, they're diagonal. So they add a really cool dimension. And I'm going to show you how to do that in just a second. And on this card, with those diagonal score lines, I thought it would be really nice to put the sentiment on the bottom right. It's kind of a little place that almost looks like it's purposely designed for that sentiment because of where the score lines are. So just another idea in terms of where you can put your sentiments. But I also wanted to show you that you don't need to die cut the front of your card. You can, as you see, you can stamp directly onto that focal point and then go in and make those score lines. And it gives a really cool effect. You could come back on this card, and very similar to what we did on the other one, you can add those pieces right on the top. And because there's dimension in your base, in your focal point, you just got a lot going on in here. It's very simple, but it's still, there's quite a bit. And on this one, just changed out the colors, but I did the horizontal scoring. And I just want to take 2 seconds here to show you how to do that horizontal scoring, because I do have one little trick that will come in handy for you. So if you've got a piece, and let's say you want to mimic this horizontal scoring, here's how I suggest that you do it. Obviously, grab your scoreboard. Stupid statement, but I'm going to make it. And then if you put your piece of paper in a like a diamond orientation, you're going to be able to center where that point is. But the trick is, you don't know where at the bottom the line is going to be drawn straight. So if you take a piece of paper and you put it on your scoring board and you know where that straight line is, you can come back in and you can line up where you need your points to be. So I've lined up my paper so that I've got both points in that groove. And I know that when I score this, it's going to go all the way to the end, and it's going to go right straight in the middle. And it's just a quick and easy way to make sure that you have your paper where you want it to be. And then I'm using that same pattern that I did on the other one, where I score one line and I skip one, score one and skip one. So I'm ending up this time, I've got 5, just because I want it to be symmetrical on either side of the middle line. Then what you're going to do is you flip this over, and because now you have that visual of where that straight line is, you can see when it's lined up, grooved at the top and at the bottom, and just make sure that you've got it where the score lines go into those grooves, and then you can do the in-between scores. So I'm just going to come back in and fill in where I didn't score on the other side. And sometimes I've found, depending upon how big the piece of paper is, that you might want to put just a little bit of washi tape down to hold it on your board. But it gives you a really nice effect, and it just goes from corner to corner. If you got really brave, and I don't know that I'm brave enough to do this right now, but you know what, I'm going to try. You can also add multiple directions of score lines. So I'm going to go right down to where I scored that diagonal. So right down to that diagonal. And I'm just making a different orientation on this one. And I'm going to come back in and actually do that line. And then I'm going to flip that over and I'm going to come back in and fill in my gaps. So it just takes a second to do this, and you can make some really, really fun patterns with it. So now I've got this, that's cool. I've got these score lines that look like that would be a how in the world was that done without an embossing folder. But you can do some really, really fun things simply with your scoring tool and your scoring board. And the sky is the limit on that. So just wanted to show you that. The last thing that I wanted to point out is that these cards will fit into an A2 envelope. And I know that's a pretty obvious statement, but sometimes it's worth mentioning the obvious. So this is the card that we started with. This is the square 4 1/4 card. We know that that is going to fit into an A2 sized envelope. It has to, because it is the width of an A2 sized envelope. I've modified this envelope just a little bit because I don't want that card to slide around when it's going through the mail. I want it to stay in the middle. And it is going to do that, and it's going to travel really, really well. And we also know that if you have a square envelope that goes into the mail, you are going to get charged more because they have to manually cancel the stamps. So if I put this into just a regular old A2 envelope, it'll work, but it could move around when it's en route, and you can modify that. So what I did to modify this envelope is super, super simple. I cut 2 pieces of paper that are 4 1/4 inches long and 1/2 inch wide. And what I'm going to do on these is I'm just going to cut each of them at the top. And I'm not doing this by measuring. I'm just going to cut a little bit out. And when I bring them and I put them into my envelope, I'm going to put them way over at the side of the envelope. I'm just going to place them into the envelope, and where I cut that little diagonal, it won't show, and I can go back and trim it if I need to, but it won't show that it's inside the envelope. And then I'm going to use my tool, grab a couple of glue dots, put a glue dot on my tool, and I'm just going to open up the envelope and put a couple of glue dots on either side of that piece of paper, and then glue that down. And I'm going to mimic the same thing on the other side. And I will just glue that down as well. And what that is going to do is it's going to make a little buffer so that when I place the card inside, that card is not going to move. And because I only made it 1/2 inch wide, there's still plenty of room if the card's a little bit thick to get it in there, but that's not going to move anywhere just because it's sealed. I don't recommend that you put these in with glue. And the reason is, let's say that you took a piece of paper like this and you put glue on it and you slide it in. There is a chance that you're going to get glue on the inside of your envelope and it might stick to your card. So if you want to minimize the inside size of your envelope, use glue dots after you have these in place, and it will work fine. So these are the cards, and the things that I really wanted to highlight today were ways to add depth of color to your images, like the leaves, by using the kissing technique. And especially on very intricate designs like this, where you have the veins that you want to see. So use the kissing technique and kiss your leaf stamp with other stamps that transfers color to that leaf stamp. And then you can come back in and just add a lot of color. I also wanted to show you some ways to add some interest to your cards by putting some scoring into the backgrounds. And they can be very simple with horizontal, vertical, where you're following a straight line. They can get a little more complicated with a diagonal, where you actually do need to do a little bit of cheating to figure out how to make a straight line in your scoring board. Or they could get super cool with multiple, a diagonal, horizontal, or that could be vertical. And you just add this by using your scoring board. So there's some really, really fun ways to add some really interesting backgrounds to your cards. And then the other quick thing was how to modify an A2 envelope for a square card if you wanted to make sure that that card was not going to move around in the mail. I hope you like this. I hope you try it. In my opinion, and I've really been getting hooked on clean and simple cards lately. You know, this is the time of year when we all go through how many holiday cards are we going to make and how much time is that going to take? And we definitely want to have a very elegant card or a very fun card, a very impressive card that we send out to family and friends. And I also like cards that don't take a lot of time, but look like they are intentionally done with a lot of thought. And I think these kinds of designs lend them to that kind of card. So I hope you try it, hope you like it, and please share what you do. And that's it for now. So stay inky.